What really happened with your host, Mike Rivero, because World War III is a really bad idea. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It's Tuesday, December 11th, 2018. And we have got so much to talk about today. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Mike is in our control room, ready to answer the phone, put you on the air with your comments, questions, and observations. So let's get right on into it. And I want to start with France and the revolt of the yellow vests. This is really taking off, and it is obviously far larger and the issues much wider than being presented in the corporate media. What we're looking at here basically is a pushback against all of these various globalist agendas like climate change, open borders, and working people, taxpayers are feeling battered by all these elites who are living very high on the hog at our expense, and all these organizations like Greenpeace that are out there just shouting all kinds of nonsense to extract money and obedience from us. They're tired of corporate media lies to them. They're tired of the arrogance of the entertainment elite, who seem to think just because they're well-paid actors that they have some say over the rest of us. So this is not disaffected people. This is ordinary working people, and the videos coming out of France confirm this over and over again when they're talking to the people in the yellow vest. They're just ordinary people like you and I. And they're just sick and tired. Now, one of the analysts looking at this is saying this is the inevitable outcome of the European Union's decade-long austerity measures. Just this constant, you must make do with less so we can have more. And year after year after year, it's always been worse and worse and worse. So this Andy Vermont, a Belgian human rights activist, saying that it's reached a point where no matter how hard you work, it's no longer a guarantee that you can live a decent life anywhere in Europe. And that's true for much of the world, including right here in the United States of America. So this is a pushback against the money junkies, among others here. Now, as you know, Emmanuel Macron has surrendered to the yellow vests. He has promised to hike the minimum wage. He's promised to axe the overtime tax and slashing pension contributions. And it sounds really good. Of course, if he keeps his promises, the French government is going to go into a serious deficit. Because governments, when they get money in, the first thing they do is they spend it right back on out. It's not like they have money in the bank that they can use to keep Macron's promises. So, but his speech was rather lukewarm, and it was not well received. And the yellow vest protesters are already saying it's not enough. They want more concessions. And basically they're saying Macron had failed to listen to the protesters as to everything that they really wanted. And as I said before, if you look at the videos coming out of France, they're starting to paint icons on the back of them to signify what it is they themselves are most concerned about. Some of them are saying out of the EU, some are saying end the New World Order, some are saying close the borders. So there are a lot of these issues, all of them coming out of this push for a one-world government, and people are now pushing back. And again, the response to Macron's speech was more one of rejection and anger than anything else here. Now, the French opposition is rejecting Macron's concessions, and there's actually talk of a citizen revolution. They're actually using the R word. And apparently opposition politicians like Jean-Luc Mélenchon is calling for a citizens' revolution to continue until a fair distribution of wealth is achieved. And one of the things I saw on the videos coming out of France this morning was this comment: the wealth inequality has become too great. And again, that's the situation we have right here in the United States of America. The system is set up to move the money from the people whose labor produces the wealth into the pockets of the politicians and the money junkies, the bankers, and so forth and so on. And people have really had it. People see what's been going on. So, again, this is a revolt against taxation. It's a revolt against illegal aliens. It's a revolt against the deliberate erasure of the unique culture of France. And it's led to this population. It's totally fed up. It's totally, they're fed up. They've had enough of it here. So meanwhile, the rest of Europe is watching closely to see if Macron can get on top of this, because all of these European nations have been doing exactly the same thing to their people. And they're very concerned. This could spread. It's already spread. It is spreading. It is growing. And Europe is waiting to see if Macron can get this under control, even if Macron has to resort to violence. We've got to keep the peasantry in its place. Another video I saw coming out of France the other day, they had actually erected a guillotine. Now there's a warning sign right there. So Macron, only months ago, was being hailed as the savior of Europe and the darling of globalism, and now he's seen as arrogant and out of touch, and he may be about to pay a tremendous price for that. So the French government, meanwhile, is out there investigating Russia over the Yellow Vest riots. France has opened a probe into possible Russian interference because, you know, the French people love Macron. They love their carbon taxes. They love the refugees. So this just has to be Putin's fault. I mean, we could see that one coming a mile off. And I don't think the French people are going to fall for that one either. And I think they're going to find it insulting that the French government is trying such an obvious piece of propaganda. We're at a point right now where there isn't a whole heck of a lot the French government can do that isn't going to make the situation worse than it already is. So right now, the Yellow Vest movement has spread to a fifth country. It's now up in Sweden. And apparently it was sparked by Sweden's signing of the UN migration agreement. Other protests are now in Belgium, Netherlands, and Germany. There's a small one up in Canada. There was a microscopic one even here in the United States of America. Over in Great Britain, George Galloway on his radio show was saying, I would invest in Yellow Vests in Britain if I were you. Especially with this mess over Brexit. That could spark a Yellow Vest movement there as well. Over in Germany, workers are expressing solidarity with the Yellow Vest protest. And many people in Germany share the exact same grievances and recognize they too live under policies that favor the rich. And apparently in Western Frankfurt, some 90 companies employ more than 20,000 workers, and those workers are following the events in France with considerable attention. There's a potential for a strike. Meanwhile, in Nuremberg, yellow-vested EVG strikers immobilized the train services. It's gotten so bad that down in Egypt, they are banning the sale of yellow vests to individuals to try and avoid a copycat protest. It's really not going to work because in nearby Tunisia, protests have launched up there with red vests. I think back to what I said some years ago when this whole globalist thing really got going. I said in this push to create a global government, they're creating a political climate that could lead to a global revolution. This could very well be the beginning of it. So, meanwhile, in terms of a stark contrast, while France is on fire. Down in Italy, Salvini is shining. Deputy Prime Minister Matteo Salvini held an Italians First rally in Rome, and 80,000 supporters showed up to cheer him. Why? He's putting the Italians first. He has rejected this New World Order, open borders agenda, and the Italian people love him for it. Now, how far will Macron go? Well, apparently, pardon me, according to this article in The Sun, the French have now deployed what they're calling a liquid weapon. Nobody really knows what it is, but apparently it's capable of knocking down and putting down the rioters even if they're wearing masks. And it's some kind of a chemical stun gun. And they're starting to use that on the protesters. And again, I don't think it's going to work. It's just going to make them even angrier. So, all right. Apparently, the police are now starting to block news cameramen, journalists, who are trying to film what's going on. They're trying to keep a lid on this, but everybody there's got a cell phone. And there are videos going out over social media. I'm sure social media is trying to find some way where they can block that as well. But the stuff is getting emailed around, and they can't block that. So, vive la France. Vive la liberté. All right, in other parts of the world, Ukraine is trying to retroactively justify its incursion into the Kerch Strait by saying that Russia is restricting non-Russian ships from entering the Sea of Azov. And the form of the restriction is this ridiculous requirement to have a 48-hour application period and a 24-hour advance notice, because it's slowing everything down, and there's only a few ships that can pass through the straits at a time. Well, there's two issues you need to look at here. First of all, as I pointed out yesterday, if you go to Google Earth and you look at the narrowest part of the Kerch Strait, it looks like the shores are fairly wide apart. But if you look carefully at the water, where it's light and dark, that dark represents the deepest part of the channel where the ships can go. That's relatively narrow. I imagine it has to get dredged out on a regular basis. And you can only have so many ships in an area like that because the ship's screws will create turbulence, and turbulence will erode the sides of the dredged channel and cause it to basically fill in much more rapidly. This is all very reasonable on the part of Russia. But Ukraine is out there saying, it's not fair. It's not fair. And as you know, they're getting ready to send more of their warships through to basically demonstrate or prove that they have a right to just come and go as they wish. And Russia's got nothing to say about it whatsoever. Now, the other day we talked about this, in fact, it was just yesterday, we talked about this U.S. proposal to lease some ports from Ukraine on the shore of the Azov Sea and to station warships in the Azov Sea to permanently patrol, to basically put the hand of the United States on what is Russian territorial waters. Well, Russia is saying that's really not going to be possible because the Sea of Azov is part of the Black Sea, and it's covered by the Montreux Convention, which prohibits any nation that doesn't actually border the Black Sea from having a permanent military presence or even showing their flag there. Now, of course, the United States is in a period right now where they ignore treaties and such. But from a political, historical point of view, Russia's in the right and the U.S. is in the wrong. Now, as if Ukraine did not have enough on its hands dealing with the Kerch Strait, apparently they're getting ready to launch a war against the Donbass. And apparently they have positioned more than 12,000 Ukrainian security forces and 90 units of military equipment in the south of the Donetsk region. And apparently the story is the attack will start on December 14th, which is just a few days away. And they're just going to crank on up on them. And apparently their goal is conquering the regions of Novoazovsk and Telmanovo on the border with Russia, which is going to make Russia even more nervous. Apparently, the Ukrainian forces are transferring a significant number of aerial drones to Donbass. These are armed drones capable of carrying up to 70 kilos. And apparently, these drones can be used for provocations with use of chemical weapons and attacks on important sites in the region. So it looks like it's getting serious there. So basically, the Donetsk People's Republic has come on out and saying, yes, we understand this is getting ready to happen. And we understand Ukraine wants to establish control over the section of the border between the DPR and Russia in the area of villages Konkovo and Kolodnoye. And apparently their intelligence services say that Ukraine has 50 tanks and 40 multiple launch rocket systems, 180 guns and mortars, all concentrated right on the border. So that is going to get really, really serious. We could be at war with Russia by Christmas. Maybe they didn't want to name it World War III. Maybe they're going to call it the Christmas War. It's got kind of a nice sound to it, but, you know. Down in Syria, a prominent commander of the Free Syria Army, Fatih Gabriel, has defected from the Turkish-occupied area of Afrin and joined the reconciliation process with the Syrian government. Apparently, quite a few officers have defected. The Free Syria Army is saying, in all probability, they were Syrian intelligence assets to begin with, so no loss there. I think it's just a PR stunt here. I think the people in these various U.S.-backed terrorist groups can see the writing on the wall, as it were. All right, now, do you remember when this whole thing in Syria cranked up? You made out it was so long ago, almost 8 years, and we were all told that the opposition to Assad was an organic revolution, spontaneous within the Syrian people itself, just came out of nowhere, and we have to go on in and help them achieve their democracy. But apparently WikiLeaks has released emails confirming what we suspected all along, that Western special ops groups were in Syria prior to the start of the war, and that these so-called opposition groups were organized, trained, armed, and directed by the intelligence services of the Western countries. First and foremost, of course, the United States of America. It was another lie. It wasn't a real revolution, for that matter. Neither was the one attempted in Iran in 2009 or the one in Libya. Now, here's a little whoopsie, if you will, over at the Pentagon, which, as you know, has this reputation for just misplacing trillions of dollars here and there, made an accounting error, which means that Saudi Arabia has not been paying for the refueling of the aircraft they're using to bomb Yemen. Ultimately, you are. A little bit of a whoopsie there. Apparently, it amounts to tens of millions of dollars. And the fuel, of course, was used to bomb schools, hospitals, weddings, funerals, and on one occasion, a school bus. Okay. Down in Israel, following a shooting, Jewish groups are now calling for the death of the Palestinian president, Mahmoud Abbas. We got to take a break for commercials, and we will be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And I forgot to do the shout out to our network affiliates who are just now rejoining us here. Today is the 70th anniversary the United Nations General Assembly adopting Resolution 194. It was voted through by 35 out of 58 members. It has been reaffirmed by the General Assembly 135 times. And Resolution 194 called on the newly formed State of Israel to allow refugees wishing to return to their homes and live at peace with their neighbors to do so at the earliest practical date, and to compensate them for their losses. And of course, Israel has never complied. And Israel's excuse is, well, General Assembly resolutions aren't binding. We don't have to listen to them. But it is a reminder that the world does not agree with Israel's policies there. Okay. Over in the South China Sea, things are getting a little bit dicey. And part of the problem is exactly where are the boundaries for the international waters. Because in some cases, the land masses are so close, there's a bit of an overlap. And that area of overlap is where a lot of these confusions and disputes arise. But the islands are definitely Chinese. The Cairo Convention said that. But other nations there covet the islands because it's been discovered there are oil and gas out of there. So once again, we're seeing U.S. warships with their so-called freedom of navigation exercises sailing right up to the limits of these Chinese islands. The Chinese really don't like it. They're sending their warships after them. And it's nearing the point where the Chinese are warning the U.S. That if they don't cease these provocative actions, that they risk being rammed by the Chinese ships. And of course, after ramming is going to come naval gunfire or missiles and other bad things. Okay, getting on back to Israel. I had something out of sequence here. Ken Livingston was out there saying that it's time for an honest debate about Israel's expulsion of the Palestinians. And again, this comes on the 70th anniversary of the UN General Assembly passing Resolution 194, which said the Palestinians have a right to return to their homes. So the world is definitely saying this has gone on long enough. And World War II and whatever was supposed to have happened back then have faded into history, and Israel can't use them anymore. Back when Israel was first being formed, whatever Israel wanted to do, oh, we need a homeland. Look what the Nazis almost did to us. Well, now the Nazis are all dead. They're all dead and gone. So Israel is coming up on an election next year, and Netanyahu is scrambling to hang on to power. He was almost forced out of office last month when Avigdor Lieberman resigned. And Lieberman's resignation was triggered by Netanyahu's refusal to launch a brutal attack against the Palestinians, which Netanyahu did only because the optics are bad and the world opinion is turning against him. Meanwhile, Israel is concerned India could scrap a $500 million arms deal. And at issue are these anti-tank missiles. India is saying that more tests are needed on these missiles, and they need to be tested in a climate that is very hot, which is where Israel would be more than likely, India would be more than likely to use these weapons. And Israel is dragging their feet on the test, saying this is just an excuse to scrap the deal. And I don't know what color vests they may or may not be wearing, but apparently the ultra-Orthodox Jews are protesting and rioting and fighting the police over this anti-military draft sit-in. Now, at issue here, of course, is the fact that if you are an Israeli citizen, military service is mandatory. There has been a traditional exception for the ultra-Orthodox Jews whose particular version of Judaism forbids them to engage in violence and killing. And Israel's government has been saying, well, this really isn't fair, and we're going to start drafting the ultra-Orthodox young Jews to put in the military. This has triggered a tremendous backlash and a lot of protests. And apparently there have been rallies at Bnei Brak, Jerusalem, and a lot of this is over the arrest of Yitzhak Aiea, who was detained 2 weeks ago after failing to appear before the draft board. They've got draft dodgers over there. And apparently these demonstrators are chanting, "We will die and not be drafted." So anyway, we're going to take another break for commercials, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. Now, Qatar, which is sort of pulling away from its Middle Eastern neighbors politically, is a supporter of Palestine. They have been providing humanitarian aid, hundreds of millions of dollars, to various projects in Gaza to stave off Palestinian poverty and also try and prevent escalations in the violence. And apparently Qatar wanted to build an airport in the Gaza Strip. And they went to Israel and said, we're going to build an airport. It's going to make it easy for cargo and passengers to get in and out. And apparently Israel said, well, we'll talk about it. And they've been stalling. And now Qatar is trying to basically escalate the situation by going public and saying that, and we understand that Israel has security concerns, but the way we're going to get around that is we'll have the planes going in and out of the airport in Gaza to fly only to Doha and under Qatari security supervision. But Israel's never going to go for that. Israel has Gaza under lock and key, and that's exactly the way they like it. Meanwhile, there's an Israeli lobby group, and it's called the American Israel Education Foundation. They have apparently been going around the United States finding progressive leaders to take on these Israel propaganda trips. This is all expense-paid propaganda trip. And apparently they're working through the Pacific Northwest right now. They had a group that just returned on December 2nd from a similar trip, officially billed as an educational seminar in Israel for Southern Pacific progressive leaders. But nobody will reveal who actually went on the trips. It's a closely guarded secret. Now, this American Israel Education Foundation is an arm of AIPAC. And AIPAC and AIF share leaders, employees, and money. They also share the same address and phone number. So it's basically a front group for AIPAC out there. Now, we talked about this on the phone yesterday, but we're going to mention it again. Russia has sent 2 nuclear-capable bombers to Venezuela. These are Tu-160 bombers, and they landed at the Macuicha airport outside Caracas, following a 6,200-mile flight. They're not discussing what, if any, weapons the bombers are carrying or how long they will stay. But I think those bombers are there because of comments that were being made in Washington, D.C. only a few weeks ago about how it's time for a military solution in Venezuela because sanctions aren't working to get that gosh darn president out of power here. Somebody finally corrected my pronunciation about that Chinese cell phone manufacturer. It's pronounced Huawei. And apparently the CFO, Meng Wanzhou, has asked for bail and put up more than $11 million as collateral. She wants to basically be out. The prosecution is saying she's a flight risk because she's perfectly capable of walking away from $11 million in collateral. But the U.S. has accused Huawei of using a Hong Kong shell company to sell equipment in Iran in violation of U.S. sanctions. Here is the problem. Okay? It's not Huawei that violated the law. It's the U.S. that is violating international law by imposing sanctions on Iran that have never been agreed to on the international level. See, there's what's going on here. China has not sanctioned Iran. They haven't. There hasn't been a UN Security Council resolution that binds China to these sanctions. But a lot of countries don't agree with the sanctions. You can see how many countries are trying to basically work around them. This is another sign of America's decline. Nobody wants to go along with our bullying anymore, which I think is a good thing. Let's be honest. It's a good thing. All righty. Turning to the domestic politics. Interesting little article that came out of the American Conservative. Mueller's investigation is missing one thing, a crime. And that's certainly true here. And they start with an interesting observation. A baby who was born when Robert Mueller started his investigation would be talking by now. And basically looking at what Mueller had publicly and what he didn't have some 10 months ago, it didn't look like there was anything there. It didn't look like the Trump campaign colluded with Russia. And today there is still no evidence of collusion. Mueller is trying to salvage his reputation by going after some small fry like Paul Manafort, who got to spend 2 weeks in jail. I'm sorry, that was Papadopoulos, who was in 2 weeks in jail. You had Paul Manafort, but that's been a bust. You know, these sentencing memos that came out last week had the liberals soiling themselves. But on close reading, there's nothing in them. There's nothing in them. And it's turned out to be a disaster for everybody involved. Avenetti's pretty much washed up. He had his moment in the spotlight. Now he's fading. Stormy Daniels owes Trump over $300,000 in fees after losing to him in court. The much ballyhooed video of Trump and the prostitutes in Moscow never showed up. Carter Page and Richard Gates turned out to be totally unimportant. There's no there. So, by the way, a little side note. They're still trying to make a big deal over the fact that Trump told Michael Cohen to pay Stormy Daniels to keep quiet about her story. The way they handled it is they bought the rights to her story, which that's how book deals and movie deals are done. You buy the rights to somebody's story. And then if you choose to sit on them, you can. And here's the thing. It is perfectly legal. There is no crime there. It looks bad, but there's no crime there. Now, apparently last Friday during his closed-door testimony with House Republicans, former FBI Director James Comey said that Rudy Giuliani leaked sensitive information about the FBI's investigation into Hillary Clinton's private email server. So that's coming on up again here. Now, the other day we had this situation where a recognized whistleblower who was aiding the investigation into the Clinton Foundation had his home raided by the FBI. And the Congress is saying, why? Why did you do that? We already had all the information. There was nothing there. Maybe they were looking for incriminating evidence, or maybe they were going to plant incriminating evidence. But here's the interesting part. The Department of Justice, okay, is requesting that the justification for the FBI raid into this recognized whistleblower's home remain secret. Now, this all came out of the Daily Caller News Foundation's November 30th request to unseal the court documents for the rationale for the raid. And the documents would reveal whether the Bureau and the magistrate who signed the court order allowing the raid, Stephen Gallagher, knew what the subject was. But there's obviously something there to be hidden because the Department of Justice is saying, don't tell anybody. We can't do anything. So the whistleblower, Nate Kane, is out there saying, so I blow the whistle on the FBI. I get raided by the same FBI. Now they want to keep the FBI's reasons secret. Feels a little like 1984. Now, Matthew Whitaker, who was serving as the temporary attorney general, is out there saying that not only was there gross mishandling of classified documents by Hillary Clinton, but it was intentional. And Comey helped cover it up. Why else would she have a private email server? So Whitaker, I think, is starting to think along the same lines I've been thinking. That Hillary Clinton was replaying the Chinagate scandal and actually was selling U.S. secrets to foreign interests using that private email server to deliver the goods and the supposed charitable foundation to collect and launder the money. And while she was Secretary of State, 40% of the money coming into the Clinton Foundation came in from foreign sources. There is a big question mark there. And based on past history, it's a legitimate question to ask, and it deserves an answer. Anyway, the struggle to find a new White House chief of staff is continuing, and Piers Morgan has actually thrown his hat into the ring. He's come on out and said, "You've hired me before, Mr. President, hire me again." Piers is saying he's the one person whose reputation can't be tarnished by becoming chief of staff, and he says he's qualified for the job. Well, good luck, Piers. Okay, story out of LouRockwell.com. Taking a different approach of this. Apparently, Jerome Nadler, who's the incoming chair of the House Judiciary, is claiming it's an impeachable offense for Donald Trump to tell Michael Cohen to pay hush money to Stormy Daniels. And no, it isn't. But it does indicate what the corporate media is going to be throwing at us for the next 2 years. Every little peccadillo and misdeed of Donald Trump, all of which occurred before he ran for president. They're going to go through his life with a fine-tooth comb, and they're going to put it all out there to basically try and destroy his reputation before 2020. And I can imagine Donald Trump is developing a foxhole mentality because everywhere he looks, there are Democrats targeting him. They're aiming at Russian collusion. They're still trying to push that one. The Trump Organization, the Trump Foundation, this Trump Hotel, the tax returns, campaign finances, and so forth and so on. But again, getting on back to Jerome Nadler, however distasteful, that payment to Stormy Daniels is not actually illegal. They handled it as the purchase of the rights to her story. So, here's where it gets really interesting. Apparently, there is a $350 million lawsuit filed against Robert Mueller for constitutional violations and alleged leaks. And Jerome Corsi is one of the people Mueller was trying to strong-arm, but he's fighting back. And that's a huge lawsuit, $350 million. And I hope Corsi wins. Of course, in that crooked town, it's not entirely sure that's going to happen. Meanwhile, Joe Arpaio, the former sheriff of Maricopa County, Arizona, has filed a lawsuit against CNN, Rolling Stone, and others for defamation, for falsely calling him a felon in their reports. He's asking for $300 million. And the case was brought to federal court in Washington by Larry Klayman, founder of Freedom Watch, also founder of Judicial Watch. He himself, of course, is a former federal prosecutor. And named as defendants are CNN President Jeff Zucker, show host Chris Cuomo, Rolling Stone magazine, and the Huffington Post. See, here's where you need to do your due diligence. Arpaio was never found guilty of a felony. nor arrested and imprisoned as one of the publications claimed. He committed a misdemeanor, for which he was pardoned by President Donald Trump. But by golly, we're going to get Joe. We're going to call him a felon. We're going to say he went to jail. Well, he's fighting back. Good for him. Now, over at Judicial Watch, as you know, they've got a very sympathetic judge who is opening up discovery wider and wider. And it's getting into that email cover-up. And now the judge has said they can do discovery on what happened at Benghazi and whether the Benghazi situation motivated the Clinton email cover-up. Well, we know that's not true. The email server predated Benghazi and was being kept secret. In fact, it's very obvious nobody was ever supposed to know about that outside of the inner circle. But still, it's going to open up the possibility to find out what was really going on there. People are dancing around that email server. I think more people know what was really going on. They're scared of it, but they're all kind of like sort of edging up to it slowly, bit by bit by bit. Meanwhile, in another court case, a federal judge has ruled in favor of James O'Keefe and Project Veritas, basically saying Americans have the right to record public officials, even secretly, including police who are fulfilling their duties in public. And he went on to say that the right to record public officials is protected by the First Amendment with reasonable caveats. And apparently rejecting the opposing argument, public officials need space to work efficiently. So, now the judge said that's not to say that police and government officials have no privacy interests. However, the diminished privacy interests of government officials performing their duties in public must be balanced by the First Amendment interest in news gathering and information dissemination. Now, at issue were two cases. One which live streamed footage of police officers when they did their jobs, and the other focusing on catching politicians going against their constituents or engaging in illegal behavior. So Project Veritas has been vindicated. We have to take another break for commercials, and we will be right back. And aloha, welcome back to our show here. And we keep hearing all these claims about sealed indictments. Indictments are coming, QAnon, and I tend to ignore them because I think it's an attempt to just sort of keep us complacent, sitting in our chairs and doing nothing. Don't worry, the Lone Ranger's coming to save us, and you know, Tonto is following behind, Batman is on his way, the cavalry's coming, whatever. But in this case, I think we should take this one seriously. This is coming from Judicial Watch, and Judicial Watch has done tremendous good over the years. And apparently Judicial Watch is saying they've pretty much proved criminal wrongdoing by Hillary Rodham Clinton while she was Secretary of State. Now, they're not saying what that criminal wrongdoing was. I would love for it to be espionage, but I think it's probably going to be the pay for play. And this could be the beginning of a showdown with the deep state. It could even be a test of whether our Constitution is still valid. But we can't go on like this. We absolutely cannot. These elites are destroying our country bit by bit. We're all paying for it. Our children will pay for it. Our grandchildren will pay for it even more. Okay, turning over to the economic news here. Central banks are becoming very worried that the government, and more importantly, the people, are turning against them. And the central banks are basically in a panic. The vote on the Brexit has been delayed. There may be no deal at all. The China trade Well, apparently they're still making progress, even though the Meng Wanzhou was arrested. But I think what it's really coming down to is that people are waking up and realizing the fraud that central banking is, and that we don't need private central banking to have a national economy, because we certainly didn't have one when this country was started. And I think that awareness is spreading through the population that private central banking is all about moving the wealth from the pockets whose labor produces that wealth into the pockets of the bankers. And I think probably Americans are no more happy with that than the people of France are. Now, in the original French Revolution, not the current one so far, but in the original one, before the nobility got their trips to the guillotine, the bankers were targeted. The French people knew who the tool of their oppression was. Then they went after the authors of it. U.S. companies are laying off employees at the fastest rate since the financial crisis. Now, of course, the corporate media is always saying the economy is red hot. We've created 500,000 jobs. Stock market is doing well. It's really not true. What they don't report is how many jobs are lost in that same period of time. Okay, there's the music. We're going to take a break for station identification. We're going to be back here with more news about the economy after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here, hour number 2. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. And we're talking about the reality of the economy. And of course, the corporate media will say, last month we created 500,000 jobs. The part they don't tell you is how many jobs were lost. And U.S. companies are laying off employees at the fastest rate since the financial crisis. Some are over the trade issues brought about by the tariffs, others not able to keep up with the competition. And what's been rather noticeable as we go to the stores is normally during the holiday shopping season, they hire up a lot of additional staff so that customers coming in immediately get help. Not so much this year. You really have to look to find somebody to ask where thus and such a product is here. Apparently, Performance Bicycle is closing 102 stores. Now, over in Denmark, there is a company, ISSAS. It's a corporate cleaning industry company with a global outreach. And they're now pulling out of 13 countries, and they're letting go of 100,000 people. Now, there's another phenomenon that's showing up here, and I guess you'd have to say this was inevitable. But apparently, far more people are filing for disability benefits than would normally be the case. And what they think is happening is people who've lost their jobs and they can't find work, they're trying to get on disability. And so the numbers are artificially high. People got to eat. I find it very hard to criticize this year. American credit card debt is at an all-time high as interest rates continue to rise. See, that's the downside of the Federal Reserve rate hike. Every mortgage, every loan, every credit card that is variable rate, that's tied to that prime rate, their interest rates go up. And we've been saying for years now, knowing that this economic crisis was coming, get those credit cards paid down. Right now, the average American family has about $7,000 in revolving debt. And as the interest rates rise, so will the monthly payments to service those debts, putting the squeeze on. Article over at Investment Watch blog asking the question, why is Obamacare enrollment down? Is this a trick question? It's expensive. There are better alternatives. People don't like it. And it isn't mandatory anymore. Over in China, they've announced the discovery of a huge deposit of silver with an estimated reserve of at least 1,500 tons. Now, China is already one of the world's largest silver-producing countries, and apparently geologists discovered this in Henan province. It's part of what's called the Zhonghe deposit area that boasts 280,000 tons of lead, 320,000 tons of zinc. So, good for China. Down in Venezuela, their inflation has hit 1,300,000%. They're in Zimbabwe territory now. Oh, we have a caller on the line. Okay. Dustin in New Jersey, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, but Mike, you know the pickle that the whole world's in, it's got so much debt, and those interest rates, they can't. If they go back to zero, inflation's gonna come up. So it's like they're screwed. We're screwed. Look at France. They're broke. Britain, the whole of Europe is just broke. You can't. I mean, they're moving one chair on a Titanic with another chair on a Titanic. You know, I mean, they're running. They run out of just things to try to fix. It's unfixable. You know,
of course,
I mean,
it's unfixable. That's always been the problem with private central banking, and the people who set up the private central banks knew it all along. But that was going to be somebody else's problem down the road. When you have a private central bank, and right now there are only 3 nations left on earth who don't have private central banks, the debt will grow faster than the money supply, which means no matter how hard you work, no matter how much you sacrifice, you can never pay the debt off. It makes you a slave to those bankers. And the debt just simply grows and grows and grows until it absorbs all of the wealth of the working people, which is exactly how the bankers want it.
And Trump knows that, because remember he came out with that statement a couple of days ago saying, I ain't going to be here when, you know, when everything explodes. I think he might be here when it explodes.
Yeah, I think that could very well be the case here. And of course, the Democrats would love that. If the economy unwinds, they're going to blame Trump for it, even though what's wrong with our economy goes back multiple administrations.
Hey, Mike, did you see what Pompeo said about Russia flying halfway around the world to Venezuela? They said, what a waste of money. I'm like, what the hell are we doing? We're flying all around the world. We got all these bases around the world. We don't even charge Saudi Arabia for the fuel they use in bombing,
Yemen.
People over there.
Yeah, I mean, what a ridiculous thing for him to say.
And those 2 dictatorships, like we're not a dictatorship here, or France is not a dictatorship. I mean, like you said, they're rolling out this special vehicle. I mean, it's a mess in France. You just see today they had student protests.
Yes.
A high school student. I mean, everybody, but I'm waiting for the grandmother protest to start against Macron.
I think they're already out there. I saw a lot of pensioners in those protest videos.
And Mike, you know what pissed them off the most? When he did that increase of the fuel price, the week before, didn't he give the rich a tax break? Yeah, that's the kind of that's going on here, and also in Britain and everywhere.
Yes,
in basically in the Western world, it's the same playbook. That's why I was against Trump's tax cut. Didn't help the regular people. And did you notice he's not going to get that the little people tax cut through now? You know that, right?
Yeah,
that ain't coming.
No, the Democrats will make sure it goes down in the House.
Yeah, I mean, do you think he's like a one-term president now?
No question. Yeah. He does not have a snowball's chance in the dark regions in 2020. I don't know why the corporate media and the Democrats are working so hard, to bring him down. He's self-destructing. He's turned his back on the very people who put him into that office. He's not supporting the independent media. He's simply dropped the ball on vaccine safety. He's dropped the ball on making sure our election system is honest. It's sometimes like he just doesn't really care. He just loves being up there and being the president.
Well, did you see him in the White House today with Nancy Pelosi and Chucky Schumer? Like, they were kind of getting into a little argument over the wall and border funding and this or that. And he's like, oh, I need another $5 billion. Where are you going to get the $5 billion? The country's broke. Where is that coming out of? The Pentagon? You know, I mean, I don't. He said that all this part of the wall is either been built or. Did you see any walls being like? I didn't see anything really being built. Did you see any satellite photos? Does anybody have any satellite photos? You know,
I don't know that the wall would necessarily show up on satellite photos, unless they zoomed in real close. But yeah, I haven't seen any photos of the wall being built, and the illegals are still pouring into the country.
And then, Mike, real quick, remember the satellite photos of Ukraine, all the tanks lined up?
Yes.
Well, that base, I believe that base is 11 miles away from the eastern part of Ukraine. And there's no 1,000 tanks at the. If you saw the satellite photo, now I don't even know if those tanks are real in the satellite photo. They could have been added there.
Yes.
But that base is also a base that upgrades armor for existing tanks and optics and stuff. So there might be like maybe 100 tanks in that photo, but there ain't no 1,000 tanks if you look at the photo. If anybody can count the turrets, like I said, how do you know those rows of tanks weren't added to the photo? You know what I mean?
I'm still not convinced that photo was of the base they claim it was. That could have been a base somewhere way off in Russia itself. But
yeah, a lot of this is coming from the same group of people that lied us to Iraq, lied Libya. We all know the routine. All right, Mike, have a good show.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to do a shout out now to our on-air affiliates who are rejoining the network. Now, interestingly enough, Greek Prime Minister Alexis Tsipras had a recent visit to Moscow, and apparently one topic of discussion was the extension of the Turk Stream pipeline to Europe. And this, of course, is going to make a lot of people very, very nervous. I mean, they're all working to stop Nord Stream 2. There's a lot of politics in terms of where these pipelines are going and who basically has them. I mean, the war in Afghanistan was started over a pipeline right-of-way. A pipeline right-of-way was one of the reasons they went into Syria. So this is big, big stuff. But if the Turk Stream pipeline gets extended to Europe, then that's going to weaken Ukraine, who has been sort of in a position to extort Europe to support them, because that pipeline from Russia through Ukraine has a big valve on it. All right, let's talk about what's going on in Great Britain. Things are getting very dicey down there. As you may have already heard, Theresa May has delayed the Brexit vote. It was supposed to happen today, and it's been put off. No new date for the vote has been scheduled. And she says it's basically time for her to try and renegotiate and re-engineer the deal. And she's in a mess. She's surrounded by pro-EU campaigners, staunch leavers, MPs who want to renegotiate the deal, and others who want a completely different deal. But it's mayhem. It's mayhem over there in the parliament. The newspapers are saying the chaos is complete. And Europe's media has not been kind to Theresa May after she delayed the meaningful vote on her Brexit deal and dashed to the continent in search of further concessions. So the French Daily Liberation said it's like a long, slow agony. You know the end is near. You expect the worst. Then there's a small flicker of light before another collapse, and it always ends badly. And apparently, she said May blew her last bet, failing miserably to convince Parliament to vote for the withdrawal agreement sealed barely 2 weeks ago. Pardon me. In the Netherlands, the Volkskrant wondered whether May would still be Prime Minister by the time the House of Commons got to vote on the deal. So it's a real mess. Now, here's where Theresa May is finding herself between the rock and the hard place. Donald Tusk is saying the European Union will not renegotiate the legal text of the Brexit deal. They want it exactly the way it is, and Theresa May's job is to ram it through Parliament one way or the other. And so they're starting to talk about a no-deal Brexit, a crash out. And Britain right now is, they're in a crisis of self-confidence. Britain has long been divided by class, region, and race, but these divisions are masked by political and economic success. This has meant the English, as the dominant nation in Great Britain, are not good at coping with a sense of failure and a loss of self-confidence. Now, the nature of English nationalism, deeply ingrained, but so self-confident its norms were assumed by most English to be part of the natural order of things, is changing. And they're starting to lose their national identity. And a big part of that, of course, is the refugee crisis there. They're already talking about a replacement for Theresa May. And former Brexit Minister Steve Baker has renewed his call for members of Parliament to submit letters of no confidence in Theresa May, saying it cannot go staggering forward any longer like this. And Theresa May's duty now is to go. And apparently more of these letters have gone in since yesterday's debacle. But somehow they're always around 5 letters short of 48. Now, Baker is saying there's a short list of 4 Brexiteers who he thinks would be good prime ministers: Esther McVey, Dominic Raab, David Davis, and Boris Johnson. And he called on them to decide between themselves who would be the chosen candidate. Well, I know who Boris Johnson's going to choose. Meanwhile, up in Austria, there's been another murder by a migrant. 16-year-old girl was found dead by her mother in her room. And the main suspect is a 17-year-old Afghan citizen. Anyway, apparently, Polish border guards have detained and arrested a human trafficking ring near Warsaw. And this is a Vietnamese-Polish gang who are suspected to have illegally transported at least 100 Vietnamese citizens to Western Europe. And apparently the illegally smuggled people were taken through Russia, Belarus, Latvia, Lithuania, and Ukraine to Poland, and from there to Germany, France, and Belgium. Actually, sounds like a heck of a vacation. Anyway, they're expecting further arrests on that one here. Catalonia is back in the news. And apparently Spain is moving to quell the Catalonia uprising. And the rhetoric is getting up there. Catalonia on the brink of disaster. People could get killed. And they're saying they're close to a physical confrontation. Another Spanish Civil War. Okay. Now, getting on back to what Dustin was saying about Schumer and Pelosi and Trump, they're seriously talking about a government shutdown. Trump is saying he will not sign a new budget unless it has money for his border security. And he's out there saying he'd be proud to shut down the government for border security. Now, I caught his press conference earlier in the day, and I'm glad he is making the point that this is not just politics. It's not just immigration, New World Order. It is a medical crisis. We have all kinds of diseases that had been eradicated in this country are being brought back in. We were talking about just yesterday hepatitis spreading across the country, drug-resistant tuberculosis. all kinds of illnesses. And I'm sure the pharmaceutical companies, the medical industrial complex, they're happy as heck because their business model needs us all to be sick. So yeah, open the borders, bring in more of those immigrants and refugees. Get them all infected here. Now, the way I heard it, there was actually a shouting match in the Oval Office between Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer and Donald Trump. Apparently, at one point, they called him a Pinocchio, which I'm not sure what that's supposed to mean, unless it's you're lying. Wouldn't it be easier to say you're lying? Alrighty, we're coming up here on a commercial break. When we come on back, there's been a new development. I sort of been staying away from Sandy Hook because it's gone into history, but Wolfgang Halbig has come up with something big. We will be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And again, if you would like to help RBN, and let's be honest, it's the holiday season here, you know, and RBN has their little stocking out. Put a little something in there. The postal address to send a check, money order, or if you prefer anonymity cash, is Republic Broadcasting Network, 2251 Double Creek Drive, number 302, Round Rock, Texas, 78664. The phone number to make a credit card or debit card donation or to pledge to be a recurring subscriber is 800-724-2719, extension 1 during business hours, extension 3 at all other times. And don't forget, we're coming to the end of the year, and that front sight firearms deal is going to expire. So you probably want to move on that one. All right, so we're talking about Sandy Hook Elementary School. And a lot of people have been very suspicious about this from the beginning. And apparently, the official story is that the students from Sandy Hook Elementary School relocated to an empty school in neighboring Monroe, Connecticut, Chalk Hill Middle School at 375 Fan Hill Road until a new Sandy Hook elementary school was built with $50 million from the state of Connecticut as a result of the supposed massacre. It turns out, and Wolfgang Halbig has the documentation, is that the students of Sandy Hook Elementary School had already been moved to Chalk Hill months before the alleged massacre. He's now documented that that school was actually inactive when that whole thing went down. And that explains a lot of things people noticed, like its seriously dilapidated condition, the fact that it looked like some of the classrooms are being used for storage, damaged safety railings, which would not be allowed for an active school, and the fact that computer records show that the internet feed into that school had basically gone quiet months before the shooting. So good for Wolfgang. He scored on that one. So let's talk about Jeff Epstein. Talk about a guy who just got away with it all. Yes, he did a little jail time here. But apparently the victims of Jeff Epstein are pressing a federal judge to finally take action on their motion to throw out the controversial plea agreement that gave Epstein immunity from federal prosecution. And lawyers for Epstein's victims filed a request in the Southern District of Florida asking Judge Kenneth Mara to either make a decision or set a date for a hearing on a motion to vacate the deal. And that request, which many legal experts consider a long shot, has been awaiting his ruling for more than a year. Now, Jeff Epstein was given what victims consider one of the most lenient plea deals for a serial sex offender in history. He faced a possible life sentence for molesting dozens, possibly hundreds of underage girls at his Palm Beach mansion from 2001 to 2006. And he basically walked away with a wrist slap. And then he went on out in the Caribbean and he built a whole new place. And who knows what's going on down there. The real scandal there is how many luminaries from around the world, including Bill Clinton and part of the royal family, were down there as well, and what they were doing. And of course, you would have to be an idiot to go into either the Palm Beach house or the island and engage in that sort of thing. You just know it's going to be wired with cameras and microphones. That may be the reason Epstein got that plea deal. He's got the goods on a lot of people. Blackmail is a tool of statecraft. There's nothing new about that. You can read it throughout the history books. You know, having a chip in the big game, as they like to say. Okay, so let's talk about what's going on over in the world of social media. Twitter is now openly purging regular conservatives, and they're just apparently going down the list. And when Twitter and big tech companies started banning fringy right-wing characters, nobody objected. Now they're just going into the regular mainstream conservatives. And you know, it became that camel's nose under the tent. Once people went along with saying ban the fringies, then you can't complain when we start banning, you know, others. I think back to that article we talked about yesterday. Silicon Valley is supposed to be about technology. Now they're the morality police. Apparently, Twitter is also enforcing Israeli military censorship. And this is coming from the Electronic Intifada. And they were forced by Twitter to delete a tweet linking to a story that was subject to Israeli military censorship. Now, Facebook has become notorious for enforcing censorship on behalf of Israel. This is a new thing for Twitter. We got to take another break for commercials. And we will be right back. Aloha America, welcome back to our show. Now, not too long ago, the CEO of Google testified before the House Judiciary Committee about how Google collects and filters data. And according to the transcript, apparently he went in there and stressed that Google continues to work with the government to keep the U.S. safe and secure, but says our mission is to protect your privacy, which we all know what a joke that is. And he says, protecting the privacy and security of our users has long been an essential part of our mission. Now, I noticed they were talking about privacy and didn't quite really get into the issue of political bias in the search algorithms. And I would have liked to have seen a little bit more about that. And of course, they're all denying there's political bias. They're just saying, well, you know, we're still tweaking the algorithms. But there is a clear anti-conservative bias in all of these systems out there. Now, here's an interesting little story. Apparently, Google employees considered banning Breitbart from Google AdSense on, and you'll love this, moral grounds, which would have stopped it from taking in advertising revenues. Somebody leaked out the emails, and apparently employees expressed concern in February of 2017 about hate speech and fake news appearing on Breitbart. And they basically said, let's squash its revenue by blocking it from AdSense. Now, AdSense dominates the digital advertising market, and they're weaponizing it. What they want to do is deprive websites they don't agree with of a revenue stream. And that's just another form of censorship. Now, Democratic Representative Nadler has come on out saying Google is a kind, big-hearted company that can censor anyone they choose to. This from the same Democrats who were screaming that a baker had absolutely no right to refuse to make a gay wedding cake, which shows you how inconsistent Democratic thinkers can be. The phone company is not allowed to censor phone calls. And I think the FCC erred, probably intentionally, in the way it classified social media in order to avoid that restriction. that equal access to information. But it doesn't really matter because people are moving to the alternative platforms. They're starting to rely more and more on email. I mean, I haven't used social media since the beginning of the year, and it doesn't seem to be hitting me at all. My readership is going up. My audience is going up. Now then, if you are an Android user, apparently that has now become the most popular operating system for hackers, cyber criminals, even more so than Windows. And they're just going after it. Now, I've been asking for a long time, why is nobody doing anything? And I got my answer finally, and it's a bit of a shocker. Because apparently in the United States, Great Britain, and for that matter, the European Union as a whole, they do not recognize production of malware as being a crime. Now, according to the Deputy Director of Russia's National Coordination Center for Computer Incidents, Nikolai Murashov, said, as a matter of fact, no bans exist on the production of such malware, whatever country one may look at. U.S., British, and EU representatives at international forums devoted to international information security firmly oppose the adoption of any recommendations for criminalizing such activity. Now, I wonder why that would be. Does that tell us who the cyber criminals are? We already know that here in the real world, the government is looting the population through civil forfeiture and the police. What if the governments themselves are behind this epidemic of cybercrime as a way of plundering us even further? To me, that's the only possible reason that they could firmly oppose criminalizing malware. If they just wanted to say, well, we don't have the time and resources, that's one thing. But these three representatives of these three countries, the EU, basically got up at these forums saying they firmly oppose the adoption to criminalize such activity. And Murashov recalled that according to experts, 1 in 8 software vulnerabilities was critical or highly dangerous. The costs such vulnerabilities are fraught with rest heavily upon our shoulders. In most cases, the manufacturers are not responsible for the reliability and safety of their products. Now, it just occurs to me there may be one more reason why the U.S., Britain, and EU do not want to criminalize malware and cybercrime, because they want people to stop using their portable electronic devices and go back to watching TV. That one's a bit of a reach. I think my first theory is probably the most likely. Anyway, again, Nikolai Murashov is saying that the technical data available proves that the West's Russia hacking conspiracy theories don't hold water. And he says it's very obvious that Western propagandists are ratcheting up, feeding the public the theory that the Russian Federation is behind the majority of attacks and our country meddles in the political process of other countries, influencing elections. But reliable technical data that can be analyzed by experts never confirms the accusations. We know that's certainly true in the case of the DNC email leak, because the metadata on those files showed it couldn't have been taken off over the internet. It was copied too fast. It was copied onto a flash drive and walked out of the building, probably by Seth Rich. Paul Craig Roberts is out there saying that truth and free speech are being taken away from us. It says free speech and the ability to speak the truth are being shut down. It is happening with the complicity of the print and the TV media, the liberals, the U.S. Department of Justice, the law schools and bar associations, Congress, and the federal judiciary. This attack on Julian Assange is the arrow aimed at the heart of the ability to publish the truth. If a journalist can be indicted for espionage for publishing leaked documents that a corrupt government has classified in order to conceal its crimes, the First Amendment is dead. That is really what is at issue here. Now, the claim is that the government was harmed by the WikiLeaks publishing the truth. Basically, it's saying truth is now harmful to the government, and that tells you a lot about what's going on in our country today. And this will get extended. They'll include the publication of any information, even if it's unclassified, the government regards as harmful. And the corporate media goes back to its job as the Ministry of Propaganda. Speaking of propaganda, you no doubt will see in the corporate newspapers op-eds, very often appearing under the byline of well-known people. It turns out that they, like scientific research papers on the latest medication, may not be what they seem to be. Apparently, there is a company, Keybridge Communications, and was founded by a former writer for the Wall Street Journal, and it specializes in writing and placing op-eds. They have some of the country's most influential trade groups and global corporations as clients. They place 3,000 op-eds per year. For a mere $5,000, Keybridge offers these services. They write a 500 to 800 word op-ed, then they place it in one or more newspapers around the country. That guarantees reaching at least 50,000 readers. It's all bought and paid for. That's pretty sleazy. Pretty sleazy. Aluminum, soybeans, iPhones, crude oil, cheap Chinese gadgets. But apparently a very little regarded area of concern has to do with chips, chip making. And apparently Xi Jinping was visiting a chip plant in the city of Wuhan, and he made this interesting remark. No matter how big a person is, he or she can never be strong without a sound and strong heart, which was his way of saying that China's ability to manufacture chips is a major part of their economy. And he's absolutely right. He's absolutely right. So China has ambitions to be a leader in next-generation technology, including artificial intelligence, which rests on whether or not it can design and manufacture cutting-edge chips. And apparently Xi Jinping has pledged at least $150 billion with a B to build up China's chip manufacturing capacity. And according to Financial Times, China's plan has alarmed the United States, and chips or semiconductors have now become the central battlefield in the trade war between the two countries. Now, I've often talked about how we have allowed manufacturing to leave this country, and one of the areas in which we did that definitely was chip manufacturing. Even though the United States invented the integrated circuit chip as part of the Apollo moon program. But the corporations that acquired that technology from NASA as part of the technological fallout briefly ran chip factories in this country, and there's still a few of them, but most of them simply licensed the chips and the technology to other countries, including China and Japan. And they have surged way, way ahead as a result. When Seymour Cray was designing the last generation of supercomputers for his company, he didn't even go to the American chip makers. He went right to Japan and said, I need you to produce these chips for my machine. Okay. This is just getting silly out here. Okay, LaGuardia High School is doing a production of The Sound of Music, which, as you know, is the story of Austria's von Trapp family that flees Austria during the Third Reich. Well, an article in the New York Daily News is reporting that concerned that Nazi imagery might be upsetting to certain people, the school administrators ordered the production to take out anything with a Nazi symbol. And this LaGuardia High School is a school for music arts and performing arts. And the night before opening night, Principal Lisa Mars demanded that props with Nazi iconography be removed from costumes and set design. That is just, that's really going too far. I mean, the Nazis were a reality. Okay? And fleeing the Nazis is central to the story. Who are the von Trapps supposed to be running from? It's amazing. Okay, there's a new term of craft out there in the world of right to keep and bear arms, and it's called the gun quacks. And what it is a growing body of doctors who are joining the call that all guns should be banned because they cause violence. Well, guns do not cause violence. You put a gun down somewhere, it'll just stay there. It doesn't move at all. Doesn't leap up and start shooting people. These are the same doctors who, of course, are pushing these SSRI and other prescription antidepressant drugs that have been linked to nearly every mass shooting. But they want to go on selling those drugs because that's where they're making their money. Well, if there are mass shootings, we're not going to stop selling the drugs that cause the violence. We'll just join in the call to ban all guns. That will not solve the problem. Because if there are no guns, people whose brains have melted down on these medications will simply use something else. A baseball bat, a hammer, a knife, a car. They're scapegoating guns and gun owners because they're selling a product that is itself very, very dangerous. Meanwhile, over in Baltimore, they're having to spend $1.4 million to replace the police department guns that apparently have a problem with accidentally misfiring or not firing at all. And so the county has awarded a no-bid contract to replace more than 2,000 FNS-40 pistols used by its police officers with Glocks. Glocks are good. We all know that. Here is my question. Didn't the police department do their due diligence? That sidearm is one of the most important pieces of the police officer's kit. And you need to know it's going to work when you want it to work and not go off when you don't want it to go off. And apparently somebody somewhere went with these very low-cost FNS-40 pistols, and they didn't find out until after the fact that there were a problem with them. That's just silly. Isn't it funny? The people who want to grab the guns know the least about them. All right, we're going to take another break for commercials. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And there's been a new development in the Huawei case here. Apparently, a former Canadian diplomat, Michael Kovrig, has been detained in China without explanation. Prime Minister Trudeau is basically saying they're on top of this thing. They take it very seriously. And a statement from Global Affairs Canada said that because of Canada's Privacy Act, no other information can be disclosed. Chinese officials have not given an official explanation for Kovrig's arrest, but the suspicion is it's a retaliation for the arrest of the Huawei CFO. Now, on the other side of China here, they've succeeded in launching their space probe to the far side of the moon. And apparently they had a Long March 3B rocket carrying the Chang'e 4 lunar probe, and it's scheduled to land on the moon and begin conducting experiments and survey work by the end of this month. And the various experiments, 6 of which are Chinese, include analyzing minerals and measuring radiation. And of course, they have a relay satellite so that they can communicate with us from here on Earth. Okay, Russia has delivered 3 more of their RD-180 space rocket engines to the United States for the use on the U.S. Atlas launch vehicles. And it's kind of interesting with all of this hostility and tension going on that they're still doing this. But again, the United States has forgotten how to make these rocket engines. I understand over the last year there have been a couple of startups trying to build new rocket engines. They're not doing very well. Probably because the engineers who knew how to build the rocket engines, left the United States when all of that stuff got shut down, and they went to countries where their skills were needed. The way Wernher von Braun came to the United States after the Nazis got shut down. So interesting here. Okay. The Russians recently launched a Soyuz mission to the ISS. It was to replace the one that had a malfunction a month or so ago. And apparently they're using this mission to test a brand new telemetry system called the Astra 06. And it's on board as additional telemetric equipment. And apparently it's the flight test. And it was measuring quickly changing parameters. Basically, it looks like it's simply got a higher bandwidth and more data being collected and sent. And after the tests are over and the performance is confirmed, the new system is expected to be used aboard future spaceships. And, we've got to take a break for station identification. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 3. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Why don't you give us a call? We're talking about Russia's exploits in space, and apparently the Russians who are back on the ISS, they have begun or they did a spacewalk to go on out and look at the Soyuz MS-9 spacecraft. This is the one where they found there was a hole on the external surface of the habitation module that was leaking atmosphere out into space. And there was a lot of talk about where it came from, what had happened. It looked like there were scores around the hole, like it might have been drilled. They're not really sure. So they had this 6-hour, 31-minute spacewalk where they went to the exterior of the spacecraft, peeled back the thermal insulation and the meteorite shield to try and take a look and figure out what's going on. And they basically did an inspection. They took photos. They're scraping off samples from the whole surface, and they'll send them aboard the same Soyuz MS-9 spacecraft back to Earth on December 20th. It'll be sent back, obviously, under ground control, and they're going to try and figure out what's going on. The MS-09 spacecraft was sort of permanently moored there at the ISS as a lifeboat, and no doubt Russia will send up another one as well. So apparently the cosmonauts had to dismantle the equipment of the Endurance experiment, which was carried out to study the influence of spaceflight's conditions on certain materials. That sort of reminds me of the LDEF, which went up on the space shuttle, and was this giant steel frame with all these little panels in it, and it was launched on the flight just before Challenger, and because of Challenger, they weren't able to go up and retrieve it in a timely manner, as it were. It was left up there much, much longer than they planned. By the time they got it down, a lot of those panels were completely empty. The space environment had just destroyed whatever material was in there. What was really interesting about that experiment is they flew a bunch of tomato and basil seeds on the LDEF, which were then made up into these little kits that were sent to schools, where you had the space seed and you had the equivalent seeds that had been kept on Earth. And you could do a little science fair project of planting them and see if there was a difference. There never was, I should point out here. But it was always, it's a way of getting the kids a sort of a direct connection with the space program here. So, all right. Hollywood director Ryan Murphy, who directed films like Glee, American Horror Story, and Pose, has announced he's launching a multi-million-dollar organization that will target candidates running for office who are anti-LGBTQ. And apparently at a Los Angeles event last week honoring the Trevor Project, which is a suicide hotline for LGBTQ youth, he actually named names of those he's going to target. And I think they've crossed a line here, and they've made a strategic mistake. It's one thing to push for acceptance, and they got that. You know, we're accepting that there are alternative lifestyles out there. Now they're trying to push past, they're out of the closet. They want us straights to go in. And I think that's why they're engaging in this kind of political activism. Way too much PC in this world here. Okay, as you know, we've got this monster winter storm Diego. It's dumping snow and ice all across the southeast. It just made a huge mess. Carolinas, parts of Georgia, power outages all over. And it is a very hard, very early start to the winter. Turns out the Old Farmer's Almanac was right, and all the global warming proponents, once again, were wrong. Remember back in March 20th, 2000, headline news, snowfalls are now a thing of the past. And we have had several record-setting winters since then, and every winter seems to get worse and worse and worse as we slide into the grand solar minimum. And those physicists and astronomers who are not on the payroll of the global warming scam are coming on out and saying, this is going to get really bad. You know, we're talking about serious cold in the northern, southern latitudes that is going to cause famine. They won't be able to grow bumper crops. It's going to get really a bit of a mess here. All right, we're going to do a shout out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. So there is that storm there, and we're just now getting into winter, and it's time to get those snow tires out and get them on the car. Apparently, so far this month, it is the coldest December on record in China. On record. So the data is just out there, and the corporate media is still pushing. Well, they don't even call it global warming anymore because they're starting to look silly, but it's climate change. Now it's climate change. We can stop climate change. I remember what Alexandria Ortiz, can't even remember her name, Ocasio-Cortez, came on out and said, if we end climate change, we'll end racism. And I want to go back to something that people seem to forget. Climate is always changing. It always has. It always will. It was changing long before humans evolved on this world. It'll go on changing long after humans have gone extinct. Because what controls the climate here on Earth is solar radiation and the orientation of Earth's poles and orbit. As the Earth tips back and forth, the dynamics change. As the orbit goes from circular to ellipse and back, you get alternating between the ice ages and the interglacials. And we're in an interglacial right now, but we may be getting out of one. All right, we're going to take a phone call here from Tom in Connecticut. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
You just made a statement about the new research about Sandy Hook. I've called you in the past. I live about 10 miles from Sandy Hook.
Yes.
And it's my wife's a physician. She knows people who knew people involved in that tragedy. Whether it was this is a hard thing to unwind. They just released something about these documents they found about Adam Lanza researching serial killers, thousands of pages of this obsession. But the point I'm trying to make is, okay, so if you unwind this, what possible resource or who could release information that would be credible enough to undermine something like this, or undermine something like 9/11, or undermine something like the Oklahoma City bombing? A revelation from what source would resonate with the public to say, hey, they've been dicking us around for like a long time. This is unbelievable.
Well, there is no authoritative source that such information would come from.
Great term. Authoritative source that someone would believe. Yes.
Okay, because the government and the corporate media declare themselves the authoritative source. So it has to basically be an individual exploration where people begin to doubt the official story. They see what's out there, and they go and they do their research. And as far as Sandy Hook is concerned, just search for Wolfgang Halbig. I mean, they're trying to silence him through lawfare.
Oh no, I've read his information, and Jim Fetzer. You know, there are tremendous inconsistencies in the whole thing.
Yes.
But once again, being so close to this and having people who supposedly know people that were killed or were involved with this, supposed tragedy, it's hard for me to unwind this being so close to it locally. You know what I'm saying? So
well, yeah, I hear what you're saying.
You can't even broach the topic in this area, because it's so emotionally charged.
Well, there's two different things going on here. Okay, if it was real, it was traumatic, although it should be fading by now. If, in fact, it was a monstrous hoax, then nobody wants to talk about it because I'm sure, the government was very generous with those people. In fact, I understand that most of the so-called parents had their mortgages paid off completely after it was all over.
Yes, I've seen that whole idea floated out there too. Yeah. Yeah, but once again, it goes down the line of everything that has been perpetuated from all the way back in the Kennedy assassination. How far back you want to go? That although people seem to start to think, a majority by whatever researchers say that the American public has significant questions about the Kennedy assassination, but then there were baby boomers like us, that are kind of fading off, and maybe, the light's starting to shine and say like, wow, maybe that doesn't really make any sense, let alone 9/11.
Yes.
So once again, authoritative sources trying to find this whole new idea that they're going to have some grand jury investigation about 9/11 that's been approved.
Yeah, that is a major breakthrough. That there's actually going to be a grand jury impaneled to look at evidence of controlled demolition in the World Trade Towers. And the U.S. Attorney went along with it. It is the letter of the law that lawyers can come on in and request a grand jury. What the U.S. government is going to do to try and shut this down, I don't know, but it's guaranteed they'll do something. They will definitely do something. They don't dare allow any one of these secrets to come on out, because the first time the American people say, we were lied to about X, they're going to start looking back at everything they were ever told by the corporate media and the government, and they're going to realize the extent to which we've been lied to throughout our entire lives. And politicians lie. It's been going on since the country started. You remember that story about George Washington and the cherry tree?
This is Rome, for Christ's sake. It's like, it's just, but then, Campbell's nose under the tent kind of thing. Yeah, if they did this, what else did they do?
Exactly.
I mean, if there's not enough ideas about lies of the media from how we got into 18 years of war, weapons of mass destruction, and bang the drum about friggin' Saddam Hussein, I don't know what, beyond that, easily documented, easily proven. It was a hoax.
Yes,
and yet,
it was a lie.
On and on it goes.
I mean, do you remember that story about George Washington and the cherry tree? Father, I cannot tell a lie. That was a lie. They made that up for his election campaign. So yeah, they've been lying to the people pretty much all along. And I mean, look at all the whoppers they were telling about George Herbert Walker Bush. And
oh my God, that was nauseating. That was revisionist history at its finest.
Well,
that was just unbelievably.
I wouldn't say at its finest. I think at its actually, I went the other way at absolute worst. Definitely polishing the poo there.
Oh my God! I bring this up to people, and I say, do you remember any of this stuff? You're my age. Do you remember any like Iran Contra stuff or?
Oh yeah.
His statement, his documented statement to Sarah McClendon. If the American public found out what we actually did, they'd drag us down the street and lynch us.
Yep.
So oh really? He said that? Really? I mean, this is how, I guess, cocooned inability to process the ideas that we have been lied to this long, inability to accept that possibility is just, I think that's kind of the way the American public goes.
Well, fewer and fewer of them. We're seeing all of these studies and polls where the American public have become very distrustful of the government and of the corporate media. And they are starting to ask questions. And that's why the government is getting so nervous. And that's why they're trying to get social media to shut down all these discussions. A lot of the websites for the corporate media have shut down their comment boards because of the negative comments coming on in, basically saying this story makes no sense.
I mean, Alex Jones fan or not, what is happening to him, what is happening to then down the line of DICE and Natural News, all these people that are being marginalized, cut out of these social medias, cut out of search engines, all the way down the line. And nobody, I don't know why nobody, like, what is free speech all about anymore? It doesn't make any difference. And the aspect of, like, the most liberal, it used to be, well, what did that term used to mean? Tell me what you think. This is an open forum of ideas.
You mean
they're the most repressive. It's mind-boggling at this point. It really is.
Yeah,
I'll let you go for now. Thank you so much, and take care.
All right, thanks an awful lot. Well, you know what they say, the very best slaves are the ones who believe that they're free. That's the situation that we're in right now. Our elections are all but meaningless. We're slaves to the private central bankers, and our schools and TV and movies are saying, we are free, we are free, we are free. No, we're not. Okay, the phone lines are open again, 800-313-9443. We're talking about climate change, human-caused global warming, and we know it's been this gigantic fraud. Back in the 1990s, when they first started this up, the world actually was warming. And so, like any politician, Al Gore said, we're going to take something that happens naturally, we're going to declare it to be a crisis, and then we're going to offer to sell people the solution. And that happens an awful lot. Oh, this is a crisis. We've got to do something. I need funding. Then, of course, in the early 2000s, global temperatures began to decline. And rather than say, okay, the problem is solved, let's go on and find something else to do, the proponents of global warming literally committed fraud. And that was confirmed by the documents and computer codes leaked out of the Hadley Climate Research Unit at the University of East Anglia. which showed a conscious decision to conceal from the public the fact that global temperatures had started downward. Hide the decline. That's where that came from. It was an outright fraud, and they enlisted all their friends in corporate media to push this idea, the world is warming because of human activity. And then about 5 years ago, when it was very obvious the world was not warming, they switched it to climate change. Oh, the climate is changing, and it's all the fault of you human beings, you icky-poo human beings, and you will atone by paying carbon taxes and by allowing a global environmental authority to tell you how to live your life. The global warming was one part of the plan for the New World Order to bring it about, along with a global pandemic, that one fizzled in 2009, and a global financial crisis, which looks like that one is definitely going to happen. But I don't think that's going to work for the globalists, because most people are smart enough to realize that economic globalism and private central banking is what created the economic crash, and having more globalization and private central banks is not going to be the solution. Anyway, apparently it's expected that Justin Trudeau will likely lose election next year because of Canada's new carbon taxes. And by the way, in a world that is cooling, it makes absolutely no sense to limit carbon or to tax it. If in fact you believe that atmospheric carbon will warm the atmosphere, then isn't that what you want when you're heading into a mini ice age? Of course, we know that that was never true anyway. Even NASA confirmed that carbon acts as an atmospheric coolant. All right, we're going to take another break for commercials. Do call in and join us on the air. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And boy, was that a timely little bump, considering we've been talking about human-caused global warming. Apparently, Donald Trump has, or the Trump administration, has agreed to a one-time aid package for American farmers harmed by the China tariffs, which is like saying, instead of dying quickly, we're going to let you die slowly, and that's a kindness. Anyway, getting on back to global warming here. Over in the Los Angeles City Council, yes, it's California, and we know they're all crazy out there. They're looking at a proposal that would mandate that public venues sell vegan food in order to fight climate change. So if you're going to like a sports venue or a concert venue or something, you know, forget about, you know, hot dogs, hamburgers, and chili fries and everything. It's going to be plates full of lettuce. Okay, here we are. Quaker Oats, the breakfast of Anchorage, Alaska, is being sued for glyphosate contamination. And so Quaker Oats and their parent company, PepsiCo, they're being sued for not disclosing that 17 of their food products are contaminated with troubling levels of glyphosate. Now, the company likes to say its products are healthy, but who's going to believe that now? Morgan Strickler of California filed suit at the end of October 2018 on behalf of himself as well as others who reside in the area, and it was filed in the U.S. District Court for the Central District of California and cites unfair competition laws and the Consumer Legal Remedies Act. And this is getting to be a problem. I think it was about a month and a half ago, we had a story where children's breakfast cereals were found to be contaminated with glyphosate. These companies that are harvesting these products and processing them are not taking the time and trouble to make sure the glyphosate is completely cleaned off. Although, as far as we know, glyphosate actually seeps into the food. And glyphosate is a probable human carcinogen. And so we're living in a country where, because of corporate greed, we are being sold food that has the potential to make us very, very ill and to kill us, to make us very sick. And of course, the medical industrial complex is happy as all get out, because their business model requires us all to be chronically ill. That's where they make their money. If we were all of a sudden, all of us healthy, they'd go out of business. In fact, we just posted a flashback to that article where Goldman Sachs came on out and said, actually curing patients is not a good business model. And it's getting harder and harder to find safe and healthy food. Now, I've noticed that Whole Foods is running a major ad campaign for the holiday season, and but again, they built their reputation on organic, natural, safe food. Then they got acquired, and despite the presentation of still being healthy and everything, it's the same kind of fare you get at any other supermarket. Now, Trump was talking about the health crisis being brought about by the open borders, and he's right about that one. But there's also another major health crisis being brought about by corporate malfeasance, and nobody wants to talk about it because it makes money. And if it makes money, that's a good thing. Who would want not to be making money? I'd like to make money, but there are certain things I'm not going to do it, which is probably why I'm going to die broke. Now, fortunately, we have a down-to-earth nearby, and so far they're remaining pretty much pure. They're following the GMO project. They've got all the stickers and stuff so we can avoid that stuff. But this problem with glyphosate, our farms have been saturated with the stuff. And if they cannot get it out of the food that's processed from those crops, then the entire nation, the entire population is being exposed to a carcinogen. And that is a very, very sorry situation. Okay, apparently, this has come on out. Newly released court documents are showing Monsanto has been accused of hiring third parties to literally hire an army of internet trolls to post positive comments on websites and social media about Monsanto, its chemicals, and GMO, and to downplay the potential safety risks surrounding glyphosate. Now, the documents are from the ongoing Monsanto Roundup litigation in Northern California before U.S. District Court Judge Vince Cabrera. So, we're not going to bother having a healthy, safe product. We're just going to propagandize you. Okay, we got callers on the line when we come back from these words from our sponsors. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, and we're going to take some phone calls, starting with Rob in Illinois. Aloha, Rob. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. I was prompted to call by the Quaker Road story and the cereals and the glyphosates. You know, they don't just spray the glyphosates as the pesticide over the crops. My understanding, and I heard this, you know, just what I heard, okay, people talking about it, is that when they harvest it and they put it in the silos, it doesn't just immediately go into the manufacturers or whatnot. It sits in those silos. So while it's sitting in there, for the grains not to dry out, they will dose it again with glyphosate upwards of 2, 3, 4 times, however long it takes to keep it from drying out. And not only is it poisoning it, obviously, and doing that, but no rats or anything will eat it. So, well, that's what I got there.
Glyphosate is actually a preservative, and they'll actually spray it on the produce at the supermarket. You know, and most supermarkets now have an organic produce area, and you need to talk to the manager of that department and ask them if that's being sprayed with the glyphosate as well. But it is a preservative, and it keeps the fruits and vegetables looking fresh longer as they go through the supply chain. And it's sort of making up for the fact that in this age of corporate farming, the distance between where it's grown and where it's consumed gets longer and longer.
Right. When you take all that produce home, you know, you got to soak it. You got to wash it really good. I heard apple vinegar is really good.
Yes.
For like some of your fruits with some of the harder skins, you soak it overnight in this apple vinegar, you know, before you consume it, because, you know, again, what you just said, and it travels through who knows where, and it could be from place to place, from storage to storage, and how many people are handling that fruit on top of the fact of whatever they spray on it.
Yeah.
So,
well, we know that like the FDA has been turning a blind eye to the abuses of big pharma, and there's no reason to expect that the USDA is not doing exactly the same thing for big ag.
no, they're all in on it. CDC, you know, all of them, they're all in on it. It's about making money, and a lot of these are privatized. They're not even really being regulated by the government anymore. What we think is being regulated by the government, and I'm sure you've spoken about this at length many times. Okay, that's all I got for you. I appreciate it. Thank you.
All right. Well, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go. And again, going back to that lawsuit that Robert F. Kennedy Jr. just won, in which it turned out that the government agency that was supposed to be keeping watch on vaccine safety hasn't been doing the tests for 30 years. I mean, that's pretty bad. All right, back to the phones. Joe in Oklahoma. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Good evening, Michael. I must take exception to the last caller on one point that he made. I've been involved in agriculture all my life. I'm turned 70 years tomorrow.
Happy birthday.
45. Thank you, sir. 45 years, and I am quite familiar with much of the uses of glyphosate and other ag chemicals. And, you know, I'm not going to debate the issue on its absorption into the plants and its uses over the top of the crop. But I think from my observations here in the central United States, that is a bogus charge that these produce and the grains are sprayed prior to binning to keep them from drying out, because you cannot put grains in a grain bin and with them having any, a very significant amount of moisture, let's say 10 to 11% moisture, without them molding and
Yes.
spoiling.
Yes.
So I think that is just off the wall. But
well, there's another reason to
point
think
I
that,
called
and that's
that-
because if they're in a silo, you can only spray the top layer.
Exactly. So, you know, somebody's trying to spread misinformation here, and, you know, we want the truth. That's what we're all in search of. But what I really called you about, the food safety issue, is the country of origin labeling on our meats. I don't think most people are aware that our major packers are foreign-owned anymore. We did have country of origin labeling mandated by Congress. It was in effect for 2 years, to where when you looked at a package of hamburger, you know where it was produced from. Not packaged from, but produced from. And what's happened, the big beef packers have got the rules changed to where if it can be processed in any country in the world, but as long as it's packaged in the United States, it can say product of the United States. And people need to call their congressman and even President Trump on this. You know, if you want to buy Brazilian beef, so be it. If you want to buy Taiwanese beef, so be it. But if you want to buy American beef, you should know that it was conceived, bred, and grown and fed and slaughtered and packaged in the United States of America. We have the safest beef supply. We had the safest beef supply, but look at the beef recalls we've had with JPS at the helm.
Yes.
And I thank you, sir.
All right. Well, thank you very much for that.
Thank you for your time.
And it's a health issue. There's no question about it. And we all know that Americans' health overall has been in decline. The more they adulterate the food, the more vaccines they give us, the worse our health is. And it's very obvious there is a pattern. People in other nations are much, much healthier overall than the American people. And that's not even getting into the issues of the obesity crisis, which is itself caused, at least in part, by chemicals that are added to the food, like monosodium glutamate and aspartame and unmetabolized hormones. So, but again, if they can put chemicals in the food that make you eat more, then you will buy more. They will make more money. That's really what's driving it here. Okay, we have, let's see, Chris in Clearwater, Florida. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, the caller, a couple calls back, said that soaking your food in organic raw apple cider vinegar, I believe, that's what he meant, can be helpful. And the reason that's also helpful to consume is that it has a type of acetobacter bacteria that can biodegrade glyphosate. There's a 2010 research study out of Nigeria that found that, and it's entitled Biodegradation of Glyphosate Herbicide in Vitro Using Bacterial Isolates from 4 Rice Fields, and from the African Journal of Biotechnology, where it was published. And some of the other foods, other than the raw organic apple cider vinegar that have this acetobacter, are kombucha, sauerkraut, kimchi, and some cheeses, and possible yogurt, according to MIT researcher Stephanie Seneff, who's done a lot of very pioneering work on glyphosate and implicating it with autism. So there are ways that we can degrade glyphosate in our systems.
Chris, are you still there?
I am. Sorry, I had a call coming in. What part did you miss?
No, I got it all. It's just I thought we got disconnected here. Anything that is going to cause glyphosate to degrade quickly ought to be something that every kitchen needs to have, and probably identifying some of those along with the apple cider vinegar, which we use, by the way, would be a good thing. But what a strange thing to literally view your kitchen as your last line of defense against food products that are not good for you.
Oh, I know. We have to do what we can to detoxify, since glyphosate is toxic in parts per billion, parts per trillion, they found. And another possible way, I'm not sure, but one thing I like to do is soak my food in freshly ionized alkaline water that will electrostatically adsorb or draw out through the van der Waals forces. It's, if you want to look that up, it's 3 words called VANDERWAALS. So it's kind of like electromagnetically, but electrostatically soaking water or soaking food in freshly ionized alkaline water will draw out the positively charged toxins and pathogens from deep within.
Okay.
Even when you soak yourself, or spray it on your body, or soak your feet, or soak your whole body if you're able to do so. I'm not sure if glyphosate is positively charged, but if it is, that would probably be another good way to detoxify. And since the more alkaline the ionized water, the lower the surface tension, meaning the better it is as a surfactant, kind of like soap. And since a lot of most pesticides are petroleum based to prevent them from rinsing off in the rain, that's another good quality of the more alkaline the ionized water is. The lower the surface tension, and the greater the adsorptive or the antioxidant quality. It's just to simplify things. The faster it is, you can soak things in a matter of minutes. The more alkaline, say 11.5 pH alkaline ionized water, will take about 10 minutes to soak and fully adsorb the positively charged toxins and pathogens, whereas, say, 9.5 pH might take an hour. So that's something else that I found also useful.
Okay, well, that's really good information, and it definitely bears looking into finding ways to counter the glyphosate, because it's obviously not going away. Monsanto's making huge amounts of money with it. It's their cash cow along with the Roundup Ready seeds. So we're stuck with it. We are stuck with it. We're going to have to just adapt to that.
Well, if anybody has been injured, they can contact. I know there's a law firm, I believe in San Francisco. They're out of California, the Schmidt National Law Group. You can contact, and they'll help sue Monsanto and Albert. That's SCHMIDT National Law Group. NationalInjuryAdvocates.com is their website.
Well, okay, that's good to know. I know that Monsanto's being hit with thousands of lawsuits right now. They're still trying to knock down that settlement for that groundskeeper. They got most of it thrown out, but that's not enough for them. They're still trying to whittle that back on down. But there are a lot of people getting ready to file these lawsuits, and they have this legal precedent where the court found that glyphosate was the cause of this person's injury. So I'm sure Monsanto's lawyers are celebrating that they're going to get raises and bonuses and larger offices. Anyway, Chris, thanks an awful lot for the phone call. We're going to let you go and switch over to Art off the grid. Aloha, Art. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. I wanted to talk about Cortez, but real quick on the whole glyphosate thing.
Yes?
I am a farm boy. I grew up on a farm. I've lived on a farm most all of my life, and I know a little something about growing a crop. I live smack dab in the middle of dozens and dozens and dozens of farmers who grow corn commercially for commercial purposes.
Okay.
None of them, again, I say none of them spray anything on anything when it's being stored in the silos or anything like that. Once it is out of the field, it does not get sprayed. That's so anybody saying it does, either one, doesn't know what he's talking about, or two, is intentionally telling lies. Now, with that being said, I'm glad to hear about that apple cider vinegar thing, because I did not know about that. I'm gonna definitely keep that in mind. Now, and as far as this whole concept that rats won't eat this, that's a myth too, because if rats wouldn't eat it, I'm going to give you an idea just how small a town I live in. On weekends, the teenage boys get together and hang out over at the silos, and they have what they call rat parties, where they shoot rats with BB guns.
Okay.
Now tell me the rats won't eat this? Yes, the rats will eat it, so that's another lie.
Yeah, that caller was trying to, maybe that's one of those hired trolls from Monsanto.
You have to kind of wonder. Now, with respect to the Alexandria occasionally has a cortex in her mind of some sort, I'm trying to figure out, I went and I watched the video of her talking about this, and I'm trying to figure out just exactly how converting to renewable energy, and I'm assuming she's talking about solar and wind and such as this, how this is going to eliminate racism, because I'm here to tell you, folks, I really hate to be the bearer of bad news. I hate to rain on your parade, punch a hole in your balloon, or whatever, pull the plug on your leaky sink. You are never, I don't care who you are, where you go, what you do, or how you say it, you are never, ever, 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 ever going to eliminate racism or biasness of any form. It is not possible. So long as man walks this earth, we will have prejudice and bias in one form or another. And you are not going to get rid of racism. You're not going to get rid of homophobics. You're not going to get rid of Islamophobics. You're just not going to do it. It isn't possible. Let's stop fighting fights that we cannot win.
Well, you need to remember that a lot of politicians will deliberately fan up racism or homophobia or sexism for political gain. There's no question about that as well. History has shown, for the most part, ordinary people tend to get along, but they're roused up into this idea of our group has to hate the other group by their rulers.
Yeah. I'm sorry. Mike, this just irritates me to no end. that we are still, after all of these years, having these same ridiculous, lame conversations where there is no resolution. I think it's time that we direct our focus toward what we can do something about, such as illegal immigration.
Okay, well, Art.
Homelessness.
Okay, politicians do not want an end to racism and sexism any more than the medical industrial complex wants an end to disease, and for pretty much the same reasons. Art, we got to let you go. We got to take a break for commercials. Back with the last segment of our program after these few words. We're going to try and fit in these last couple of phone calls. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. Final segment of our program. We've got two callers waiting on the line. I'm going to try and get through them both, starting with Mark in Georgia. Aloha, Mark. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha. I don't know if you heard that joke. There was George Washington, who mythically could not tell a lie. And then there was Richard Nixon, who couldn't tell the truth. And then we have Bill Clinton, who couldn't tell the difference.
Yeah, I've heard that one.
Oh, okay. That sounded about right to you. The problem is it's contagious where people confuse what you're being led to believe with what you ought to believe. And then there's always what they're hiding behind their back. And the thing is that if people wake up to what's hiding behind their back, it's what I call aletheophobia, is a morbid, irrational fear of truth. And the thing is that it's not a matter of being committed to this mental model or that mental model. It's a matter of being committed to following the evidence where it leads. That make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. But our schools don't teach rational thinking or analytical skills, especially in the age of Common Core. They're taught by rote. We will tell you, you will memorize it, you will speak it back, and as a result, it's probably one of the reasons why corporations are pushing for all these H-1B visas, because the quality of education of America's young is abysmal.
Yeah. Well, I have my degrees in hard science, mechanical engineering, technology, dealt with more of the practical side of how do you actually, how do you operate a lathe or a milling machine, and how do you take a piece of metal and turn it into something that you can use or whatever. And so, but the thing is, it hasn't done me a whole lot of good in terms of livelihood. Now I'm getting ready to go Ubering. I mean, not tonight, but just at FYI, I did make this is just an appetizer. I donated a few bucks today, $100, but that's just an appetizer, because first I got to figure out how much it's going to cost to fix my house, how much it's going to cost to fix my teeth that need some serious dental work, and then I'll be in a better, once I know how much that's going to come up to, then I know how to spend the rest of my inheritance. But until then, I'm kind of like, I don't want to put myself in a bad position by spending money.
No, you don't want to do that. But RBN thanks you very much for your generosity. And I'm going to let you go so that we can get one final call from Jim in Michigan. Aloha, Jim. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Michael. Love your program, my friend. I just want to make a correction that gentleman who talked about the glyphosate or Roundup being sprayed into the grain elevators, that's not really the story. There was a cardiologist that was on with Joyce Raleigh, deceased young lady.
Yes.
But he was talking about, he did massive research as far as how they harvest wheat down. And I wouldn't even go into all the technical stuff about it. But what they do to dry the wheat out now, they spray it with Roundup so it dies. So when they get to the grain elevator, they're dried. So
it's sprayed before it gets to the grain silo. That makes a lot more sense. Anyway, there's the music, Jim. I got to let you go. Thank you for the phone call. Please stay tuned for John Stadmiller. I'm sure he's got lots of interesting things to share with you. Please take what you learn here at Republic Broadcasting and whatreallyhappened.com and share it with everyone that you know. Bring back the art of the conversation. Just talk one-on-one. If you talk to 10 people and they talk to 10 and they talk to 10, we don't need Twitter or Facebook or any of that nonsense. So we'll be back tomorrow. Aloha, America.